This video will take you through Component 1 Section B of the EDUCAS GCSE Media Studies specification for newspapers, and as it's Section B, we'll be focusing on audience and ownership. The first thing I want to focus on, as with Section A, is the importance of political ideology and understanding the political ideology of each newspaper. The Guardian and the Daily Mirror being left-wing papers, the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Times, the Telegraph and the Express being right-wing papers, because that's really important when we come to look at the ownerships of the different newspapers in the UK. So what's significant here, and the ones you really need to know, is that the Sun is owned by News UK or News Corporation, Rupert Murdoch's conglomerate, and the Guardian is owned and published by the Scott Trust. The others are just for sort of background knowledge for the industry. So the Daily Mail, Lord Rothermere, the Mirror and the Express, Reach PLC, and the Telegraph, owned by the Barclay brothers. The two crucial ones being the Sun and the Guardian. You have to know those. It's important now to look at the daily circulation figures. So the Sun, the most read newspaper in the country on a daily basis, 1.45 million. The Daily Mail close behind, and actually the Daily Mail is getting very close to overtaking the Sun now, 1.26 million. You'll notice the Guardian only has 138,000. What's significant here is that of these newspapers, 3.8 million are owned by are right-wing newspapers, and just 700,000 are left-wing. That means that 84.6% of daily newspapers have a right-wing political ideology. So there is a significant imbalance in terms of readership, in terms of right-wing and left-wing. Just as importantly is the fact that over 41% of daily newspapers are owned by Rupert Murdoch's News UK. That's problematic as well, because one individual can therefore exert a lot of power and influence over the British public. It's worth watching the video on the link there, which will tell you about the Guardian's ownership and the importance of the Scott Trust and the role that they play in the Guardian's formation. It's an independently owned company, so they don't have to adhere to the will of any particular shareholder. And what that means is they can remain independent and impartial in their coverage. And you'll see from the video that the Guardian say that they seek truth, not approval. They are focused on honest news rather than fake news. And they are interested in freedom over content, because they're not influenced by a rich owner or shareholders. The disadvantage of that independent ownership is clearly that they are less financially secure. And we'll have a look at the Guardian's funding model in a moment. As I've already said then, the Guardian and the Scott Trust seem to be driven by independence and impartiality and freedom of choice rather than profit and power. Conversely, the Sun is owned by a large conglomerate in News UK, Rupert Murdoch's global media organisation. It's worth having a look at this link here to see what other companies Rupert Murdoch owns. Globally, he is a hugely powerful and influential media mogul. He owns some of the biggest media organisations in the world. Fox in the United States, and in this country we already know he owns the Sun and the Times. He has a controlling stake in Sky. He used to own a controlling stake in ITV. So this is a man who has exerted considerable influence in the media industry, not just in the UK, but globally. He is the most powerful man in the world, really, when it comes to media organisations. News UK is an example of a conglomerate. A conglomerate is a large company which owns other companies. It's usually comes about by taking over another company or merging with another company. They are very commercially minded. They are driven by the making of money and the exerting of power. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of and the motivations of a conglomerate such as News UK? Well, as far as the newspaper is concerned, the financial security that comes with belonging to a conglomerate is obviously ideal. It's easier to publicise with their much greater marketing budget. They have the power to manipulate and to change public opinion and to shape public opinion so they can exert their power. And they are motivated more by money and power than they are by integrity, like The Guardian is. With that, in terms of disadvantages for a consumer, is with the drive towards profit and power, we might move away from impartiality, and that might lead to a lack of morality, perhaps. And we've seen some serious issues in terms of stories that have been published in the Sun and the Daily Mail and papers like that before. Disadvantage to the consumer is obviously that these companies have the power to manipulate public opinion, and they are perhaps less motivated by truth and quality. I would strongly advise all GCSE media students to watch on BBC iPlayer the 3-part documentary, The Rise of the Murdoch Dynasty, particularly episodes 1 and 2, but the third one is interesting in itself, and to think about the dangers of one person holding such power in a particular industry, particularly a media industry. Think about the problem of the link between media and politics and how media can exert influence over politicians. That's surely problematic in terms of our democracy. A typical question for your exam then might be, how does ownership influence newspapers? That might be a 12 marker in component 1 section B. You might think about how a newspaper's owner's ideology influences its content and its readers. What is its purpose and motivations? And we've looked at those already. And how might a readership be informed or manipulated by the ownership structure of a particular newspaper? Things you might need to know, so knowledge that would be useful to you in answering this question. Well, who owns the newspapers, the Scott Trust and News UK in particular, and what does that ownership bring to that newspaper? The percentage of daily newspapers owned by News UK might be important, as well as the percentage of daily newspapers which are right-wing. Potential ideas, you might think about the way in which ownership influences political ideology, the danger of one company owning a large portion of daily newspapers. If you watch the documentary, you'll realise the importance that newspaper ownership plays in political circles, the way in which Rupert Murdoch influenced the 1997 general election when his Sun newspaper switched their allegiance from the Conservative Party, who they'd supported for decades, to Tony Blair's Labour Party. And the Sun take great credit for Tony Blair winning a landslide victory at the 1997 general election. And then you might think about the advantages and disadvantages of conglomerate ownership, and likewise for independent ownership. And I've included some potential sentence starters there should you wish to tackle that question. We're now going to think about audience. We've looked at ownership. We're going to think about audience now, and we're going to start with the Sun. And you are required as part of the course to have considered a whole copy of the Sun and the Sun's website. And the screenshots and print pages that you see here are all taken from the print copy of the Sun and its website on Thursday the 21st of January. So if you're quoting examples in your exam, make sure you name that date. We'll have a look at the Sun's audience first of all, because this is important in considering how the print copy and their website appeals to and targets that particular audience, and what motivates this audience to read and visit the Sun. Print and online are different audiences. You can see for print that in terms of gender, it's dominated by men, 57% as opposed to 43%. This changes when we consider online, there are more women visiting the Sun's website than there are men, and we'll look at the differences between the two as a result of that. In terms of age, the print newspaper is quite an ageing readership. We can see that 71% of the Sun's readers are 35 or over, and an average age of 49, so it's quite an old readership. In terms of income, it's a below average audience, with 87% earning under £30,000, which is the national average wage. And it's clear to see that this is an audience of C2DE mainstreamers. Online, it's a much younger audience, with nearly half the readership being aged under 35 and an average age of 36, so much, much younger than the print version. Similar in terms of earnings, with 78% being under 30,000, but it's a slightly more affluent audience, and again C2DE mainstreamers. So let's think then about how the print copy appeals to that audience we've just looked at, that sort of largely male, mainstream audience, low income audience. Well, first of all, in terms of psychographics, mainstreamers are going to be motivated by value for money. So the Tesco advert is clearly appropriate here. Tesco offering value for money and the special offers that are advertised there. The £9.50 holidays are going to appeal to a mainstream audience seeking value for money. Mainstreamers are also interested in celebrity culture, and it's interesting that the Sun chooses to focus more on Lady Gaga here than it does on the political story that is detailed on the front cover. In terms of demographics, the C2D audience are going to be targeted by the Tesco advert, and that lesser educated audience is going to be targeted by the image heavy nature of this front page and the sensationalist language that is used. In terms of political ideology, we can see that this is a right-wing paper, because even though they don't support Trump because he's too controversial and divisive, Trump is promoted over Joe Biden. He's above him, and Joe Biden is very much belittled by his depiction as Sleepy, the old man there. Moving on to page 3, well, traditionally page 3 in the Sun always used to feature a topless model, and the Sun ditched the topless model about 15 to 20 years ago. We can still see, however, that it features an overly sexualized image of the female body, appealing to that 57% male audience and the male gaze. An increasingly female audience might see this as an aspirational vision of female confidence, perhaps, and that might allow them to receive the audience pleasure of personal identity. The story about the finding of a pet is something that most readers can relate to, again, receiving the audience pleasure of personal identity, and it's clear to see that that pleasure of diversion is received by the notion of male fantasy. Page 6 is a full page advert, and if you ever want to think about and identify what the target audience is for a text, the best place to go is to its adverts, because it's companies paying for the advertising space. They want to know that they're targeting the right audience. A full page Tesco ad similar to that on the front cover, we can see that it's offering value for money, but it's also mainstream pop products such as Coke and Diet Coke, cheese and pizza, appealing to that mainstream audience. Page 12 features the editorial The Sun Says, and this is all about building trust in the audience, in the Sun's brand. The Sun Says very much gives the Sun authority, as if it speaks the truth, and the readers can feel they can rely on the Sun to speak on their behalf. It also helps to build a relationship between the Sun and its reader, because the political nature of the editorial builds a relationship between the paper and its readers through a shared political ideology. On pages 20 and 21, this is the regular bizarre column, a double page column with the focus very much on celebrity gossip and entertainment. Quite often, not during COVID times, but quite often this column will have pictures of celebrities leaving bars and nightclubs and restaurants. So it very much appeals to that mainstream audience that the Sun is targeting. Similarly, the sports section, the pull-out appeals to that predominantly male audience of mainstreamers and the C2DE target audience as well. The letters page is only a small one, but it's actually quite important because the letters help to build a sense of loyalty from the reader towards the Sun. It suggests that the Sun cares about its readers' opinions. Readers might receive the audience pleasure of personal identity by contributing to the content of the newspaper. They have their own identity and ideas validated and reinforced. We might also think about the notion of social interaction received through the dialogue with the paper and their ability as individuals to communicate with the nation. So this is all about building that relationship between paper and reader. We're now going to move on to the website and think about the way in which the website also appeals to the target audience. If we have a look at the navigation bar, first of all, well, the order of it, I think, is really, really interesting. Of course, we have COVID-19 first, because this is a universal issue that appeals to all users on a daily basis. But then the order is really interesting. We have football, TV, showbiz, fabulous, sport, and then we get to news. This is telling us an awful lot about the Sun's online audience. It is a populist paper appealing to a popular audience of mainstreamers who are interested in sport, celebrity culture, celebrity gossip, fashion, and celebrity icons. And then it's only 6th on the list is news, and then 7th is money. So it really gives us a fascinating insight into what the motivations are of a visitor of the Sun's website. Then below the fold, when we scroll down slightly, we see the news about flooding, and the Sun features incidents from around the country. This is a paper which wants to be seen to be speaking for the entire nation. The representation of Priti Patel in the Conservative Party speaks to its audience with clamping down, suggesting that the Conservatives are strong and determined as they seek to guide the nation through a difficult period, very much appealing to the right-wing readers. I've put page 3 here because I want to focus on the continuous scroll. This is the idea that as you scroll down the Sun's website, it generates new content all the time. You never get to the bottom of the page. Well, the reason for this is that it promotes engagement and addiction. It keeps people on the site for longer. One advantage of this is that there's no need to go to another website for news, but more significantly, it means that the Sun can generate increased revenue through advertising. The more people that visit the page and stay on for longer, the more they can charge advertisers for that space. And in an increasingly digital world, that advertising money online is so crucial to a newspaper's survival. The problem page is a really interesting one. The premise of this is that readers write in with their problems, but I suspect many of these are constructed by the newspaper. But anyway, it helps readers to feel as if the newspaper is speaking on its behalf and addressing their own personal problems. So we have the audience pleasure of personal relationships. We also have the audience pleasure of personal identity, because as we can see here, we have stories about marriage problems, we have stories that relate to different age groups, we have stories that relate to different gender identities. So this is a page where everyone can have their own problems and their own identities reinforced. Of course, this is about diversion and entertainment. Some people would read this purely for amusement, but it does create a connection between the publication and its reader, as if the Sun cares about its readers' real life issues. We're now going to move on to The Guardian and have a look at The Guardian's target audience. We can see in terms of gender, it's largely similar, with a predominantly male readership, just outweighing the female audience. Where it really does differ, however, is in terms of age. You can see there that over half of The Guardian's readers are under 35. This is a much younger audience than that average age of 49 that we saw with The Sun. It's also a more highly educated audience, with over half of its readers being educated at least to degree standard, and that's really different from the C2D audience that we saw with The Sun. High earning professionals, 8% are senior managers, 4% are CEOs, and over 25% are in the top 25% of earners in the country. It's a different audience to The Sun, where 87% were below average in terms of their annual wage. So this is, yes, it's a male audience, but it's a much younger audience, a much more highly educated audience, and an audience which earns more highly than those of The Sun. So let's have a think. We're going to think about the effect of the rise in digital technology on the newspaper industry and the ways in which it has affected newspapers and how they've sought to address those changes. Well, in terms of difficulties, much of the information they would normally print is now freely available online, and that's led to a decline in print sales. Online news is much more timely and an exciting multimodal format, and it's now a 24-hour industry. People demand news at 24 hours. A newspaper can only give people news once a day. And online allows people to create their own content and contribute to the news, which empowers them in some way. Advantages to the newspaper industry, well, of course, easy to reach and research stories, and much lower production costs online than with the print edition. It's worth watching the video on the link there about The Guardian and how it seeks to respond to this change in digital media and what it says about its readers. It's asking its readers to become supporters or members, making them feel part of The Guardian's purpose and drive. We're now going to have a look at what happens when you visit the Guardian News website and then try to read the story. Well, as soon as you visit the Guardian's page, you can see at the top here in big yellow or gold writing is the Support the Guardian plea. And there are two buttons there asking you to contribute or to subscribe. I think the yellow or the gold is something positive and enlightening and enriching. This is an opportunity to enrich your life by supporting The Guardian. And the two arrows, I think this is this is a forward-thinking newspaper, a newspaper which is progressive, and they're therefore promoting their values to their potential supporters. They very much are calls to action as a charity would use. So the Guardian are almost presenting themselves here as in need of your support, and they do the same in the video. And then when you click on a story, this is what you will see. You'll get an advert at the top asking you to become a digital subscriber. You once again get the Support the Guardian and the Contribute and Subscribe buttons, and you also get this pop-up at the bottom asking you to support the Guardian's cause, and the language is very much about progression and honesty and integrity, asking their readers to support that message. However, the difference with some other papers is you can shut that down. You don't have to support the Guardian, and you can read all of their content for free. If you become a Guardian supporter, you get a number of benefits: exclusive emails from Guardian journalists making the readers feel special, an ad-free experience, which is something that high-end users might be willing to pay for. You become one of their members and part of their community. So they're really trying to create this idea of family, as if you will be joining a movement, not just a newspaper. If you have a look, it's worth taking the time to have a look at the other online models that are offered by the other newspapers. They differ in lots of ways. The Daily Mirror provides all its content for free, as does the Sun, although they do have a subscription service to go with that. The Daily Mail is similar. They offer their content for free, but they have a tiered subscription where you can pay different amounts of money for a different and improving experience. The Telegraph sits behind a soft paywall, and what that means is that you can access some of the content for free, but you have to pay for all of it. And the Times, it sits behind a hard paywall. You can't read any of their content without subscribing and paying for it first. So we see here the different ways in which newspapers are embracing the digital age in order to create funding structures and revenue streams. The reason they've had to do this, and you might get a question about the impact of digital technology on the newspaper industry. Well, let's look at the problems first. There's been a 40% decline in print sales in the last decade. The biggest problem with that is, yes, they don't make money from sales, but there's been a fall in print advertising as a result. Smaller audiences mean that companies are willing to pay less for adverts. That has traditionally been and still is the main source of revenue for newspapers. So they've got falling readerships and falling revenues. We've got an audience that demands 24-hour news. Let's remember, newspapers are only printed once a day, and an audience that demands accessibility and convenience, which print newspapers can't offer. There are a number of benefits, however. With an online presence, there's an increasingly global audience, so a newspaper's potential reach is much bigger. They can provide a more interactive user experience. Videos in particular are a way of engaging an audience. They're much more able to capture their audience's data, which means they can sell better to them, and they are more attractive to advertisers. There's obviously a much broader range of platforms on which they can engage their audience and advertise. And as we've said before, they can benefit from lower production costs. What solutions have they sought to overcome the issues of the increase in digital media? Well, of course, they can provide news on multiple platforms, so it's essential for all newspapers to have a website, an app, and a social media presence. And we've seen the way in which newspapers have adopted different subscription models, free, freemium, and hard paywalls, in order to generate revenue from their online presence. And we're going to finish by just having a recap of target audiences and how the content of each of these two newspapers appeals to those target audience. Well, we have the high-earning, educated ABC1 audience of succeeders and reformers for The Guardian, who are attracted by the text-heavy nature of the page, the serious tone, the focus on hard news such as business and industry, and the professional colour scheme. Whereas a C2D audience of mainstreamers that the Sun is appealing to are targeted by the focus on images over text, the informal tone of the language, and the value for money that is offered by the newspaper in terms of its cost and its adverts. I hope that's been a useful look at section B of the the newspaper specification for Educast GCSE Media. I haven't covered everything here, but there should be enough here to allow you to approach any question that you might get in that section of the paper.